The moment my husband spoke those words, something inside me shattered into 1,000 pieces. He stood in our kitchen, his hands gripping the marble countertop until his knuckles turned white, and told me that taking his mother to court over what she had done to our 5-year-old son would destroy our marriage forever. The morning light streaming through our bay windows seemed to dim as his ultimatum settled between us like a living thing. I could hear Benjamin playing in the next room, unaware that his parents were standing on the precipice of a decision that would reshape his entire world. I looked at Marcus then, really looked at him, seeing not the man I'd fallen in love with 8 years ago at that coffee shop in downtown Portland, but someone I no longer recognized. His green eyes, usually so warm and full of laughter, were cold and distant. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the one he'd gotten falling off his skateboard at 15, seemed more pronounced as he frowned at me. This was the man who had promised to protect our family above all else, who had held my hand through 36 hours of labor, who had cried the first time Benjamin called him Daddy. Now he was asking me to choose between justice for our son and our marriage. The words came out of my mouth before I could stop them, each one deliberate and final. "There's the door." Those 3 words hung in the air between us like shattered glass, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. I watched the color drain from his face as he processed what I'd just said. His mouth opened and closed several times, like a fish gasping for air, unable to believe that his wife of 7 years, the mother of his child, would choose legal action over family unity. But he didn't know the whole story yet. He didn't know about the hidden camera footage I'd discovered on my laptop, the videos that showed exactly what had happened during those 2 days I was gone. He didn't know about the confession his sister Sarah had accidentally sent me, meant for their cousin, but mistakenly delivered to my phone, detailing the family's plan and her role in it. He didn't know that I'd already spoken to 3 other parents whose children had been similarly violated by his mother over the years, their stories buried under threats and family pressure. Most importantly, he didn't know that this wasn't the first time his mother had tried to do something like this to Benjamin, only the first time she'd succeeded. 6 months have passed since that night, and this morning I found him standing outside my apartment building in the rain, tears streaming down his face, holding a letter that would reveal truths neither of us had been prepared to face. The man I once loved, the father of my child, had finally understood why I did what I did. But by then, it was already too late for us. The damage had been carved too deep, quite literally, into our son's innocent skin. Let me take you back to the beginning to help you understand how a love story could transform into a nightmare that would leave permanent scars on all of us. I need you to see what I saw, feel what I felt, so you can comprehend why I made the choices I did. It was 8 years ago, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in Portland, when I first laid eyes on Marcus Chen. Yes, Chen. His grandfather had been Chinese, though you'd never know it looking at him with his sandy brown hair and green eyes. He was standing in line at my favorite coffee shop, Powell's City of Books Cafe, wearing a vintage flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing intricate tattoo work that seemed to dance across his forearms. I was 26 then, fresh out of my pediatric nursing residency, still adjusting to the Pacific Northwest after growing up in Southern California. My parents, Korean immigrants who had built a successful restaurant chain, had been horrified when I announced I was moving to Portland for work. They'd wanted me to stay close to home, to marry a nice Korean doctor or lawyer, to give them grandchildren who would speak Korean and honor our traditions. Instead, here I was, sitting alone in a coffee shop, reading a medical journal and trying to pretend I wasn't stealing glances at the handsome stranger with the mysterious tattoos. He caught me looking and smiled, a crooked grin that made my heart skip. When he got his coffee, instead of leaving, he asked if the seat across from me was taken. That simple question changed the trajectory of my entire life. We talked for 3 hours that day, until the cafe was closing and they had to politely kick us out. He told me about his work as a graphic designer, his love for the Portland art scene, his collection of vintage vinyl records. I told him about my work with children, my struggle to balance Korean family expectations with American independence, my secret love of terrible reality TV shows. Marcus came from what he proudly called an artistic family, though that description barely scratched the surface of their reality. He described them with such warmth and pride that first day, painting a picture of creative, free-spirited people who lived life on their own terms. Every single member of his family, from his 70-year-old grandmother down to the youngest cousins, treated their bodies as living canvases. They weren't just people with tattoos. They were people who had built their entire identity, their family culture, their very essence around the art of permanent body modification. But I didn't understand the full implications of this until much later. That first day, I only saw Marcus, intelligent, funny, kind Marcus who listened to me like I was the most fascinating person in the world. He had a way of making me feel seen that I'd never experienced before. When he asked for my number, I gave it without hesitation, something completely out of character for cautious, careful me. Our courtship was a whirlwind of adventure and discovery. Marcus introduced me to parts of Portland I never knew existed: underground music venues, pop-up art galleries, food carts that served fusion cuisine I couldn't even pronounce. He was patient with my moments of cultural confusion, like when I automatically took my shoes off at his apartment door or when I insisted on bringing an elaborate gift the first time he invited me to dinner. In return, I taught him about my world, the importance of family hierarchy, the beauty of Korean traditions, the art of making perfect kimchi from my grandmother's recipe. For 6 months, it was just us. He'd mentioned his family, of course, told stories about their eccentricities and their fierce loyalty to each other, but somehow there was always a reason we hadn't met yet. His parents were traveling, his sister was busy with her new baby, there was drama with his cousins. Looking back, I wonder if he was protecting me, giving me time to fall so deeply in love with him that I couldn't run when I finally saw the full picture. The first time I met his family was at a 4th of July barbecue in their backyard in the Woodstock neighborhood of Portland. Marcus had been nervous that morning, something I'd rarely seen from him. He kept adjusting his shirt, running his hands through his hair, asking me if I was sure I wanted to go. I'd laughed it off, thinking he was just suffering from typical meet-the-parents anxiety. I'd dressed carefully for the occasion, a modest sundress that covered my shoulders, minimal makeup, my long black hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. I wanted to make a good impression, to show them I was worthy of their son. The moment we walked through the gate into their backyard, I felt like I had entered another dimension entirely. It wasn't just the visual assault of color and imagery that covered every visible inch of skin on every person there. It was the atmosphere itself, thick with something I couldn't quite name. Pride, defiance, cultish devotion. Marcus's mother, Patricia, was the first to approach us. She moved with the confidence of a woman who had never doubted her place in the world, her arms stretched wide in welcome. Patricia was a striking woman in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair swept up in an elaborate bun held in place with what looked like antique Japanese hair sticks. But it was her skin that commanded attention. Her arms told stories in ink, elaborate dragons and phoenixes that seemed to move as she gestured, their scales catching the afternoon light. Her neck bore delicate script in languages I couldn't identify, and even her hands were adorned with intricate mandala patterns that extended to each fingertip. When she smiled, I noticed a small tattoo on the inside of her lower lip, though I couldn't make out what it was. "You must be the famous Mina," she said, pulling me into a hug before I could extend my hand for a shake. She smelled of patchouli and something medicinal I couldn't place. "Marcus has told us absolutely nothing about you, which means you must be very special indeed." His father, Robert, was no less imposing. A tall man with the build of someone who had once been athletic but had softened with age, he wore no shirt despite the formal occasion, displaying his entire back transformed into a battlefield scene that looked like something out of a medieval tapestry. Warriors clashed across his shoulder blades, dragons soared along his spine, and at the very base, near his waistband, was a date. presumably when the massive piece was completed. He shook my hand firmly, his grip strong despite the arthritis I could see affecting his ink-covered fingers. "Welcome to the family gathering," he said, and something in the way he emphasized the word family made it sound like both an invitation and a warning. As Marcus led me deeper into the gathering, I began to understand the full scope of what I had walked into. There were perhaps 30 people there, ranging from toddlers to elderly relatives, and every single one of them bore tattoos. But these weren't just decorative choices or rebellious statements. The tattoos seemed to follow patterns, to tell connected stories, to mark hierarchies and relationships I couldn't begin to decipher. A group of teenagers sat together comparing their latest additions, while an elderly woman I later learned was Marcus's grandmother held caught in a lawn chair, her papery skin more ink than flesh. The children were what disturbed me most, though I tried to hide my reaction. Kids as young as 7 or 8 bore small but elaborate tattoos on their arms, legs, and in one case, across a little girl's collarbone. They weren't temporary tattoos or henna. These were permanent marks on children who couldn't possibly have consented to such modifications. The children seemed proud of them, showing them off to each other, comparing whose was newest or most painful to receive. It was like watching a bizarro version of kids comparing Pokémon cards, except these collections were carved into their skin forever. Marcus had warned me they were different, but nothing could have prepared me for the intensity of their lifestyle. As we made our rounds, meeting aunts and uncles and cousins, I noticed how every conversation eventually circled back to tattoos. Who had gotten new work done? Which artist was the best for which style? Whose children were ready for their next piece? They spoke about it with the casual enthusiasm most families reserved for vacation plans or school achievements. During dinner, instead of asking about my job as a pediatric nurse or my hobbies or even basic get-to-know-you questions, they wanted to know why I didn't have any tattoos. The question came from Marcus's Aunt Diane, a woman whose entire skull was tattooed with delicate floral patterns visible through her buzzed hair. She asked it with what seemed like genuine curiosity mixed with concern, as if I had revealed I was missing a vital organ. "I've just never felt called to get any," I said, trying to keep my tone light and non-judgmental. "It's beautiful artwork, but it's not for me." The silence that followed was deafening. Forks paused midway to mouths. Conversations at the other end of the long picnic table died out. Even the children seemed to sense the sudden tension. Patricia, my future mother-in-law, reached across the table and touched my bare forearm with what I can only describe as maternal concern mixed with pity. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice soft and sympathetic. "Is it a medical condition? There are ways around most skin sensitivities these days. My friend's daughter has eczema, and she still managed to get a beautiful half-sleeve done." I glanced at Marcus, hoping for support, but he was studiously examining his potato salad. No medical condition," I replied. "I just prefer my skin the way it is." If the previous silence had been deafening, this one was crushing. Robert actually set down his beer, the bottle hitting the wooden table with a thunk that seemed to echo. Patricia's hand was still on my arm, but now her touch felt less like concern and more like she was examining a fascinating specimen. "But how do you express yourself?" asked Marcus's sister Sarah, a woman I later learned was only 2 years older than me but looked like she could be from a different species entirely. Her entire body, from what I could see, was a canvas of interconnected scenes featuring mythical creatures and sacred geometry. "How do people know who you are?" The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a woman of Korean heritage, sitting with a family of white Americans who had appropriated Asian-inspired tattoo designs without understanding their cultural significance, being questioned about my form of self-expression. Half of the tattoos I could see contained bastardized Korean or Japanese characters that probably didn't mean what they thought they meant. Patricia's arm featured what was supposed to be the character for strength, but actually meant soup. But I smiled politely and tried to navigate the conversation without offending anyone. As our relationship progressed, I learned to navigate the peculiar dynamics of his family. They weren't bad people, just different in a way that sometimes bordered on oppressive. Every family event centered around tattoos. Birthdays meant trips to the tattoo parlor. Christmas gifts were often tattoo sessions or equipment. They had a dedicated room in their house that served as an amateur tattoo studio where family members practiced on each other. The walls were covered with photos documenting each family member's tattoo journey from childhood to present day. Patricia tried to warm up to me in her own way. She would show me tattoo magazines and point out designs she thought would look beautiful on me. She once offered to pay for my first tattoo as a birthday gift, unable to understand why I politely declined. The most uncomfortable moments came when she would make comments about how our future children would carry on the family tradition. She had already planned out their first tattoos, she told me with excitement, designs that would match their cousins and create a new generation of living art. Marcus and I had many long conversations about this. He assured me he was different from his family, that he understood not everyone wanted to live that way. His own body was covered in tattoos, but he had made peace with my choice to remain ink-free. He promised our children would have the freedom to choose for themselves when they were old enough. I believed him. I trusted him. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was to think family patterns ingrained over generations could be so easily broken. When I became pregnant with our son, the family's excitement reached new heights. Patricia became almost affectionate toward me, though her warmth always came with undertones about hoping the baby would inherit the family's artistic spirit. She started knitting blankets with tattoo-inspired patterns and buying onesies with printed designs that looked like temporary tattoos. At my baby shower, she gave a speech about how this child would bridge two worlds, bringing my Korean heritage together with their family traditions in a beautiful fusion of art and culture. The birth of our son, Benjamin, marked a turning point in family dynamics. He was a beautiful baby with my dark hair and Marcus's green eyes, a perfect blend of both of us. Patricia cried when she first held him, whispering promises to him about all the wonderful things she would teach him. For the first 2 years of his life, things were relatively peaceful. The family seemed to respect our boundaries, though there were always subtle pressures and comments about when Benjamin would get his first tattoo. The real problem started when Benjamin turned 3. In their family tradition, 3 was the age when children received their first small tattoo, usually a simple symbol that would be added to over the years. Patricia began campaigning hard for us to follow this tradition. She would show us photos of Marcus at 3 years old, crying as he got his first tattoo, but proud of it afterward. She talked about how it was a rite of passage, how it bound the family together, how Benjamin would feel left out if all his cousins had tattoos, and he didn't. Marcus began to waver. I could see the family pressure getting to him. He started making comments about how maybe one small tattoo wouldn't be so bad, how it could be something meaningful that Benjamin would appreciate when he was older. We had our first real fight about it. I couldn't believe he was even considering permanently marking our 3-year-old child's body. He accused me of not respecting his family's culture. I reminded him that culture doesn't justify violating a child's bodily autonomy. The tension in our marriage grew with each family gathering. Benjamin would play with his cousins, and I would see Patricia watching him with calculation in her eyes. She started buying him temporary tattoos, teaching him to apply them himself, praising him extravagantly when he wore them. She told him stories about brave little boys who got real tattoos and became part of something special. I tried to counteract her influence, but it was exhausting being constantly vigilant. Then came the day that would shatter everything we had built. It was a Thursday in March, and I had received an emergency call from my mother in California. She had fallen and broken her hip, and my father was overwhelmed trying to care for her alone. I needed to go immediately to help them navigate the hospital system and arrange for home care. Marcus was in the middle of a critical project presentation at work that could determine his promotion. We needed childcare immediately. Against my better judgment, I called Patricia. She had been asking to babysit Benjamin more often, claiming grandmother's rights and making us feel guilty for not trusting her. She answered the phone with such enthusiasm when I asked if she could watch Benjamin for 2 days. Her voice practically vibrated with excitement as she assured me she would take perfect care of her grandson. Something in her tone should have warned me, but I was too stressed about my mother to pay attention to my intuition. I waited for Patricia to arrive, gave her all the necessary instructions about Benjamin's routines, his meals, his nap time, his favorite toys. She nodded along, barely able to contain her smile. Benjamin was excited to spend time with Grandma Pat, bouncing around and showing her his latest drawings. I kissed my son goodbye, trying to shake the uneasy feeling in my stomach as I drove away. The image of Patricia's eager face haunted me during the entire 5-hour drive to California. At the hospital with my parents, I tried to stay focused on their needs, but I couldn't stop checking my phone. Marcus texted updates throughout the day, assuring me everything was fine. His presentation had gone well and his mother had picked up Benjamin without any issues. They were having a great time, he said. Benjamin was happy and hadn't even asked for me. Instead of being reassured, these messages only increased my anxiety. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint what. That evening, as I helped my mother get settled in her hospital bed, my phone rang. It was my sister-in-law, Sarah. Her voice was strange, a mixture of excitement and something else I couldn't identify. She was calling to congratulate me, she said. For what? I asked. For finally letting Benjamin join the family properly. Her words didn't make sense until she sent me a photo that made my blood turn to ice. There was my 3-year-old son, unconscious or asleep, with a fresh tattoo on the side of his neck. Not just any tattoo, but an elaborate design of intertwined serpents in black and red ink that covered an area larger than my palm. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the phone. I tried calling Marcus, but he didn't answer. I called Patricia, but her phone went straight to voicemail. In a panic, I told my parents I had to leave immediately. My father, seeing my distress, insisted on driving me back, despite his own exhaustion. During those 5 hours of hell racing back home, I left dozens of messages, each more frantic than the last. Sarah had stopped responding to my texts, probably realizing she had made a terrible mistake in alerting me. When we finally pulled into my driveway at 2 a.m, Marcus's car was there. I burst through the front door to find him sitting in Benjamin's room, watching our son sleep. Even in the dim nightlight, I could see the angry red inflammation around the fresh tattoo on my baby's neck. The design was even worse up close, the serpent's eyes seeming to glare accusingly at me for failing to protect my child. The skin around it was swollen and hot to the touch, clear signs of infection already setting in. Marcus tried to explain, his words tumbling over each other in a rush of justification and apology. His mother had told him it was a surprise, a gift to welcome Benjamin officially into the family. She had taken him to a tattoo artist she knew, someone who specialized in tattooing children and had done all the cousins' first tattoos. She assured Marcus it was safe, that the crying was normal, that Benjamin would thank them when he was older. By the time Marcus found out, it was already done. He had been furious with his mother, he claimed, but what could he do? What was done. I couldn't speak. I couldn't scream. I couldn't do anything but stare at my baby boy, his innocent face marred by this violation. When I finally found my voice, it came out in a whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. I told Marcus to get out. He tried to argue, tried to minimize what had happened, tried to make me understand it wasn't that bad. That's when I spoke the words that would echo through the rest of our lives. Sue your mother, that would end our marriage, he said. There's the door, I replied. The next hours were a blur of action fueled by maternal rage. I gently woke Benjamin and rushed him to the emergency room. The pediatric doctors were horrified. The tattoo had been done in unsanitary conditions with equipment not properly sterilized for use on children. The infection was already spreading, and they started him on strong antibiotics immediately. They took photographs for medical records, and one nurse quietly asked if I wanted to file a police report. Yes, I said without hesitation. The medical report was damning. Beyond the infection, the placement of the tattoo on the neck was dangerous for a child so young, close to major blood vessels and lymph nodes. The size and complexity of the design indicated the procedure had taken at least 2 hours, during which my 3-year-old son had been held down and repeatedly punctured with needles, despite what must have been obvious distress. The doctor's notes described it as child abuse, plain and simple. Patricia had vanished. Her phone was off, her house empty when police went to question her. Marcus received a text from her saying she had gone to stay with relatives and would return when things calmed down. She showed no remorse, no understanding of what she had done wrong. In her mind, she had given her grandson a precious gift, inducing him into a family legacy. The fact that she had done it without parental consent, that she had caused him physical harm, that she had violated numerous laws, seemed not to occur to her at all. The next morning, as Benjamin's fever finally broke and he lay sleeping in the hospital bed, I made a series of phone calls that would change everything. First to a family law attorney, then to Child Protective Services, then to the police detective handling our case. Each conversation strengthened my resolve. What Patricia had done was not just a family disagreement or a cultural misunderstanding. It was assault on a minor, child endangerment, and practicing tattooing without proper licenses for minors. Word spread quickly through the family. My phone exploded with messages from Marcus's relatives, ranging from pleading to threatening. How could I do this to Patricia? She was an old woman who meant no harm. She was just following family tradition. Didn't I understand this would tear the family apart? Think of Benjamin, they said. How confused he would be when his grandmother went to jail. The irony of them invoking Benjamin's well-being after what had been done to him was not lost on me. Marcus tried to return home that evening, but I had already changed the locks. He stood outside, alternating between apologizing and accusing me of overreacting. He brought his sister Sarah as a mediator, the same sister who had initially alerted me to what happened. She tried to explain that in their family, this was an act of love. Patricia had been planning it for months, choosing a design that incorporated elements meant to honor both Benjamin's Korean heritage and their family traditions. The serpents, she explained, were meant to represent wisdom and protection. I listened to their explanations through the closed door, my son sleeping fitfully in my arms, his neck bandaged, and his little body still fighting infection. Every word they spoke only strengthened my resolve. They saw Benjamin not as an individual with rights to his own body, but as a blank canvas for their family's artistic ambitions. They couldn't understand that their traditions, no matter how meaningful to them, didn't override my son's autonomy or my rights as his parent. The police investigation revealed disturbing details. Patricia had been planning this for months, researching tattoo artists willing to work on young children, which was illegal in our state for anyone under 18 without explicit parental consent. She had found someone operating out of a basement, unlicensed and uncertified, who specialized in these illegal procedures for families who wanted to maintain certain traditions. The conditions were unsanitary, the equipment not properly maintained, and there were no medical precautions taken for working on a young child. Child Protective Services became involved, interviewing not just our family, but Marcus's entire extended family. They discovered a pattern of children being tattooed at young ages, always explained away as cultural tradition. Several of the older cousins, now teenagers, admitted they had been forced or heavily pressured into getting tattoos they didn't want. One 16-year-old broke down crying, showing the investigator tattoos covering her arms that she desperately wanted removed but couldn't afford to fix. The investigation expanded beyond just Patricia. The tattoo artist was arrested, his illegal operation shut down. Other families came forward with similar stories, children who had been tattooed without proper consent or safety measures. What had started as my personal nightmare was revealing a broader pattern of abuse disguised as tradition. The media picked up the story, and suddenly our private family drama was public news. Marcus struggled with divided loyalties. Part of him understood my anger and supported protecting Benjamin, but the pull of family was strong, and the pressure from his relatives was intense. They held family meetings where I was painted as the villain, an outsider who didn't understand their ways and was destroying their family from within. Marcus would come to these meetings angry at his mother and leave feeling guilty for betraying family loyalty. His emotional whiplash made co-parenting nearly impossible. I hired one of the best family law attorneys in Portland, a woman who specialized in cases involving children's rights. She was appalled by what had happened and took the case with a determination that matched my own. We filed criminal charges against Patricia for assault, child endangerment, and conspiracy to commit an illegal act. We also filed a civil lawsuit for damages, including the medical costs, future removal procedures, and psychological trauma. Patricia finally reappeared with her own attorney, claiming this was all a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. She portrayed herself as a loving grandmother who had only wanted to give her grandson a meaningful gift. She couldn't understand why something that had been done in her family for generations was suddenly being treated as a crime. Her lawyer tried to argue cultural exemption, claiming this was a form of religious or cultural expression protected under the First Amendment. The legal proceedings were exhausting. Every court appearance meant facing Marcus's entire family, who would pack the gallery in a show of support for Patricia. They wore their tattoos like armor, a visual statement of their unity against me. Benjamin had to be interviewed by child psychologists who documented his trauma from the event. He had nightmares about being held down, about needles, about the pain he couldn't escape. The psychological evaluation was clear that he had been traumatized by the experience. During the discovery phase, more disturbing information came to light. Patricia had a history of boundary violations with all her grandchildren, but the tattoo incident was the most extreme. There were documented instances of her taking children for piercings without permission, cutting their hair in ways parents had explicitly forbidden, and once attempting to take a nephew across state lines for a tattoo when his parents had refused. This pattern of behavior showed a complete disregard for parental authority and children's autonomy. The criminal trial was a media circus. The case had attracted attention from children's rights advocates, cultural anthropologists, and legal experts, debating the limits of cultural practices versus child welfare. Patricia's defense team tried to paint me as culturally intolerant, a mother who was denying her child his heritage. They brought in expert witnesses who testified about tattooing traditions in various cultures, trying to normalize what had happened. Our prosecutor systematically dismantled their arguments. She brought in pediatricians who explained the medical dangers of tattooing young children. Psychologists testified about the importance of bodily autonomy for healthy child development. Legal experts clarified that cultural traditions don't override laws protecting children from harm. Most powerfully, she had several of Marcus's cousins testify about feeling forced into getting tattoos they didn't want, creating a pattern of coercion within the family. Benjamin's testimony, given through a child advocate, was heartbreaking. He described being scared, crying for mommy, being told to be brave like a big boy while strangers hurt him. He didn't understand why Grandma Pat had let people hurt him when she was supposed to protect him. His innocent words cut through all the legal arguments and cultural justifications to the simple truth that a child had been harmed by someone who should have been trustworthy. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Patricia was convicted of assault on a minor, child endangerment, and conspiracy. The judge, in his sentencing remarks, noted that while he respected cultural diversity, no tradition justified violating a child's bodily integrity and parental rights. He sentenced Patricia to 2 years probation, 300 hours of community service specifically focused on children's welfare organizations, mandatory counseling, and a restraining order preventing her from being alone with any minor children, including her other grandchildren. The civil case was settled out of court. Patricia's insurance and personal assets would cover Benjamin's current medical expenses and future tattoo removal procedures when he was old enough to undergo them safely. A trust was established for his therapy and any other needs arising from the incident. The settlement also included a clause preventing Patricia or any family member from attempting to tattoo or otherwise permanently modify Benjamin's body until he turned 18. The aftermath was devastating for the extended family. Several members cut contact with me entirely, unable to forgive what they saw as my betrayal. Others quietly reached out to thank me for breaking the cycle, admitting they had always been uncomfortable with the family's practices but had been too afraid to speak up. The family that had once gathered for every holiday and celebration was now fractured, possibly beyond repair. Marcus and I tried couples counseling, but the chasm between us was too wide. He intellectually understood that his mother was wrong, but emotionally he couldn't fully support the legal action I had taken. He felt I should have handled it privately, within the family, without involving authorities. The fact that his mother now had a criminal record, that she was banned from seeing her grandchildren unsupervised, that their family name had been dragged through the media, was something he couldn't forgive. Our divorce was finalized a year after the incident. We share custody of Benjamin, with stipulations that no family member on Marcus's side can be alone with him and absolutely no body modifications of any kind. Marcus has been in therapy himself, working through his complicated feelings about his upbringing and family traditions. He's slowly beginning to understand how toxic some of those traditions were, but it's a difficult journey to question everything you were raised to believe. Benjamin is now 5 years old. The physical scar from the infection has faded, but the tattoo remains, a permanent reminder of that horrible day. We've consulted with dermatologists who recommend waiting until he's at least 12 before attempting laser removal, as his skin needs to be fully developed to handle the procedure safely. In the meantime, we use special makeup to cover it for school and public outings, though Benjamin sometimes asks why he has to hide his special mark. Therapy has helped Benjamin process what happened. Through play therapy and age-appropriate discussions, he's learning about body autonomy and the importance of consent. He knows that what happened to him was wrong, that Grandma Pat made a bad choice, and that Mommy and Daddy will always protect him from anyone who tries to hurt him. He's developing a healthy understanding of boundaries and the right to say no to unwanted touch. I've become an advocate for children's rights, speaking at conferences about the importance of protecting children from harmful cultural practices. My story has helped other parents in similar situations find the courage to stand up against family pressure. I've connected with support groups for parents dealing with boundary-violating grandparents and have found a community of people who understand the difficult choice between family harmony and child protection. Patricia completed her probation and counseling, though reports suggest she still doesn't fully accept responsibility for her actions. She maintains that she was showing love in the only way she knew how, that the family tradition was more important than arbitrary laws. However, her counselor noted some progress in understanding why parents need to be the ultimate decision-makers for their children and why her actions, regardless of intent, caused harm. The extended family has slowly begun to heal, though it will never be the same. Some of the younger generation have chosen not to continue the tattoo tradition with their own children, recognizing that forced body modification isn't something to celebrate. Others have doubled down, viewing the legal action as an attack on their identity and becoming even more insular in their practices. Marcus has found his own path, separate from both his family's extreme traditions and my complete rejection of them. He still has his tattoos and doesn't regret them, but he's committed to letting Benjamin make his own choices when he's an adult. He's even considered getting some of his more visible tattoos removed, wanting to show Benjamin that these choices can be reversed, that nothing about your body has to be permanent if you don't want it to be. I've reflected a lot on whether I could have handled things differently. Should I have tried harder to work within the family system? Could I have prevented this by being more vigilant? The truth is, I did what I believed was necessary to protect my child and establish that his body belongs to him alone. No tradition, no family pressure, no misguided expression of love, justifies violating a child's bodily autonomy. The saddest part is that Patricia genuinely believed she was doing something wonderful for Benjamin. In her worldview, shaped by generations of family practice, she was giving him a gift of belonging, marking him as part of their clan. She couldn't see past her own experience to understand that forcing this on a child who couldn't consent was harmful. Her love, twisted by tradition, became a weapon that hurt the very person she claimed to cherish. As I write this, Benjamin is playing in the next room, his laughter filling our small apartment. He's a resilient, happy child despite everything he's been through. The tattoo on his neck is covered by a colourful band-aid, featuring his favourite cartoon character. One day, when he's older, we'll work on removing it if that's what he wants. Or perhaps he'll choose to keep it as a reminder of his strength, his survival, his mother's fierce protection. That will be his choice to make. The journey from that horrible night to where we are now has been long and painful. I've lost a marriage, an extended family, and the innocence of believing that family always means safety. But I've gained something too, an unshakable conviction that protecting children is worth any personal cost, that standing up to harmful traditions is necessary even when it's lonely, and that love sometimes means being the villain in someone else's story to be the hero in your child's. Patricia sent a letter last month, the first contact since the trial ended. In it, she expressed regret not for the tattoo itself, but for the way it was done. She wishes she had waited, had convinced us properly, had made it a family celebration instead of a secret violation. She still doesn't understand that the issue wasn't the method, but the fundamental violation of consent. She asks to see Benjamin, promises to respect boundaries, swears she's changed. I haven't responded. Trust, once shattered so completely, isn't easily rebuilt. The other grandchildren in the family have been affected too. Several have asked their parents why they were tattooed so young, why they didn't get to choose. These conversations are difficult, forcing parents to confront their own participation in a harmful tradition. Some have apologized to their children, promising to do better with future decisions. Others have become defensive, insisting their children should be grateful for their early induction into family culture. I've started dating again, slowly and carefully. Every potential partner is evaluated not just for how they treat me, but for how they view children's rights and autonomy. I'm upfront about our story, about the tattoo Benjamin bears, about the boundaries that must be maintained. Some men are understanding and supportive. Others reveal their own problematic views about family tradition, trumping individual rights. It's an effective screening mechanism. Benjamin asks about his tattoo sometimes, especially when other children notice it, despite our efforts to keep it covered. I tell him age-appropriate truths, that someone made a mistake, that grown-ups sometimes do wrong things even when they think they're showing love. I emphasize that his body belongs to him, that no one has the right to change it without his permission, that mommy will always protect his right to choose. These are heavy conversations for a 5-year-old, but necessary ones. The legal precedent set by our case has helped other families. Lawyers reference it when defending children's bodily autonomy against cultural or religious practices that cause harm. Child protection services have updated their training to better recognize these situations. Some states have even strengthened their laws around tattooing minors, closing loopholes that allowed what happened to Benjamin. I think about the path that led us here, how a family's twisted tradition collided with a mother's protective instinct. I think about Marcus struggling to reconcile his love for his family with his love for his son. I think about Patricia, sitting alone in her house covered in photos of tattooed grandchildren she can no longer see freely. I think about Benjamin, innocent and scarred, learning too young that love can be dangerous when it doesn't respect boundaries. Would I do it all again? Without hesitation. The cost has been enormous, the pain sometimes unbearable, the loneliness crushing. But when I watch Benjamin assert himself, when he tells someone no and expects to be heard, when he talks about his body being his own, I know I made the right choice. He's learning lessons that will protect him throughout his life, developing a sense of self that no tradition can override. The story isn't over. There will be more challenges as Benjamin grows, more explanations needed, more decisions about how to handle his relationship with his father's family. The tattoo removal process, when it comes, will be its own journey of healing and choice. The scars, physical and emotional, will always be part of our story, but we're writing new chapters now, ones where consent matters, where children's voices are heard, where love means protection rather than possession. That night when I told Marcus there's the door, I thought I was ending something. I was, but I was also beginning something else. A life where Benjamin's autonomy is sacred, where harmful traditions stop with us, where love is measured not by marks on skin, but by respect for the person within. It's been a hard road, but it's led us to a place of strength and clarity. The door I showed Marcus that night was also a door I walked through myself, into a future where my son's body and choices remain his own.